Today's video is all for the gym bros who love to train for aesthetics, but who also want to get stronger in the gym.
Let's go. Let's go.
This video is structured so that the first part is about distinguishing the differences between strength and aesthetics, how either one of them can be achieved, and finally,
the most juiciest part,
how you can train for both. Firstly, what is aesthetics? Aesthetics is a look, so it's a physique that you like or you find which is very aesthetically pleasing. And the thing with aesthetics is it's very personal. So someone may find a huge jacked bodybuilder very aesthetic, whereas another person may find a more slimmer athletic frame more aesthetic. And so the thing is, when it comes to aesthetics, it's very personal and subjective. But there are some things which are very in common. Usually the physique has quite a bit of muscle mass on it, and the body fat percentage of the physique or the person is relatively lower than the average. So could be roughly around anywhere between 8 to 12 or 13% body fat. And having such a low body fat percentage means you're able to see the striations and the definition in the muscle, which makes the physique attractive in the first place. Usually for most males or most bros in the gym, we're all after that inverted Dorito or the V taper, or sometimes if you're really crazy, the X taper where you got those huge ass quads. Strength, on the other hand, is very objective. It's not an assessment which can be different from one person to another. Basically, when someone asks how strong you are or strength, they're referring to how much you can push, so how much you can bench press or how much you can squat, how much you can row or deadlift for one rep is what usually they use in the gym sense. That's why when a bro asks you,
How strong are you, or what's your 1 rep max?
You never give your 10 or what you can do for 10 reps because it's much lower than what you can do for 1 rep. So strength basically equates to what you can do for 1 rep max, whereas aesthetics is how the physique looks. Because both are completely orientated different goals, where strength is all about numbers and physique and aesthetics is all about the look, to achieve both of them, there are different parts you can take. When it comes to building an aesthetic physique, it's all about building muscle in the right areas. And the thing with muscle building is it's not an actual skill, unlike strength, which is, and I'll be explaining that later on. Muscle building is a byproduct of training, or it's simply just the outcome or what happens when you do go into the gym and you bicep curl. You will build your biceps up. This is because regardless of what weight you use, so if you were to bench, it doesn't matter whether the weight is so heavy you can only do it for 5 reps, or you're using a much lighter weight and you can do it for 15 reps. Both sets, or even if you were to completely change out bench press and you were to do something like dips or a chest fly, pecs will still go regardless of which exercise you do and how many reps or how heavy the weight is. This is because whichever exercise you do, you're providing a stimulus to your chest because your chest has to contract under the weight and then has to lift it back up. It creates a disruption in the chest. If you want a more in-depth explanation on what I'm talking about, watch my video on the one thing that you have to be doing in your first year of lifting. So when it comes to building an aesthetic physique, you need to train hard and train correct. Train so that you can build that V taper, or it can be accentuated, which basically means prioritizing those lats and those delts, which are your shoulders. You need to recover well, and over time you'll see the gains just by training hard and recovering well. Finally, because aesthetics is all about seeing the actual physical muscle and the striations and the definition, you need to lose the fat, which means you need to get down to a lower body fat percentage, which means you do need to go on a fat loss phase or a shredding phase just to strip away the fat and show the muscles, to show that accentuated V taper. On the other hand, strength is a skill because it's all about lifting a heavy weight in a specific motor pattern, whether that be lifting a heavy bench press, which means being able to bring the bar all the way down to your chest and bringing it back up, or whether it be a squat where you got to put the bar on your neck or your traps, and then you got to go down and then come back up. Each exercise has its own motor pattern or movement pattern. This is why strength is a skill and not a byproduct of training, unlike muscle building. If you were to go into the gym for the next 5 weeks and all the exercise you did for your legs were for 15 reps, squats, deadlifts, everything you did were for 15 reps, and at the end of the 5 weeks, on the 6th week, the first day, you tried a 1 rep max on your squat, you'd get a certain amount. But for those 5 weeks, instead of doing 15 reps for all your weights, you did something like 5 reps, so much heavier weights, but lower reps, only 5 reps for each set. And you did that for 5 weeks. At the end, on the 6th week, when you're testing your 1 rep max, again for the squat, you'd be able to lift much more. This is because even though for both 5 weeks, 15 reps or 5 reps, you're building the same amount of muscle, when it comes to testing your 1 rep max, if you were to do 5 reps, the weight you would use on each of those 5 rep sets is much closer or more similar to the weight you would use for your 1 rep max. And because it's similar in the heaviness, your body's more familiar on how to like contract. So before even going into that 1 rep max, you slightly already know how heavy it's going to feel because you've used weights which are of similar weight. And because you're more familiar with how it feels, you know exactly that it's going to be this heavy and you need to contract extra hard, and your technique needs to be extra solid to be able to bring that weight back up. Whereas if you were to only practice with the 15 rep weights, or weight you can do for 15 reps, it's much lighter compared to your 1 rep max. And because of that, your brain isn't able to recognize or be familiar with how heavy the actual 1 rep max weight is going to be. And because of that, it won't be able to contract as hard, or its technique might go completely off because the heaviness is something you're not used to. That's why to lift heavy, you need to train heavy, because you're training your brain to send a connection to your muscles. So if it was squats, to send a connection to your lower body and your back, that it needs to fire very hard just to lift the heavy weight back up. So now we can see we're in a bit of a pickle. We've got one thing where hypertrophy, or all about aesthetic training, is all about the muscle building. It's the byproduct. But strength training is all about lifting heavy weights. So how are we going to mix both of them together?
No need to worry.
This is how you do it. We know that if you want to get stronger, you need to lift heavy. So when it comes to the exercises you want to get stronger in, make sure you're doing a couple of sets in the 4 to 6 rep range. This is because even though the 4 to 6 rep range isn't as heavy as the 1, 2, or 3 rep range, if you go any lower and just continuously do 1, 2, or 3 reps per set, the weight will be so heavy, it will cause unnecessary stress on your joints, which is just
Exponentially increase your joint pain.
which isn't something that you would want. Also, you'd be sacrificing a lot of gains. And you may be asking, isn't heavier weight meaning more gains because you have to contract harder? But if you were to think about it, if how heavy the weight is how large the flame is. So you have a machine, so you're on your stove and you turn the flame up to the max, which is basically how heavy the weight is when you're doing your 1 rep max. And since you're only doing 1 rep, you put your finger on the stove or on the flame for like less than a second, and you just take it out. Most likely, you're not going to burn yourself that bad. And that burning will just equate to muscle gain. Whereas if you were to reduce the flame slightly to make it the weight of your 6 rep max, or how much weight you can do for 6 reps, and you were to put your finger on the flame for 6 seconds, because now you're doing 6 reps, more likely than not, you'll burn yourself much worse, which means more muscle gain. So similarly, when it comes to lifting, no doubt the weight is heavier, but you're not providing enough reps, which means enough burning from the flame to actually create that much gain. So bringing it back to the gym, no doubt the weight is actually heavier, but because you're not doing enough reps, or in the fire case, you're not holding your finger on the flame for so long, you won't be creating that many gains. With that ticked, we need to do sets in the 4 to 6 rep range. Remember that strength is all about moving heavy weight in a specific movement pattern, which means the exercises you want to get stronger in have to be selective. For example, if you were to be very strong at the bench, because when you're lying down on the bench and holding the weight above your chest, your brain immediately knows it needs to contract its pecs very hard. And that's why the good signaling between your pecs and your brain is allowing you to lift those heavy weights. That doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be a very strong squatter, because when it comes to squatting, that's all about your lower body. And because they're two different movements where one is using your hands and the other one's using more of your legs, it's very specific. So you may be strong at the squat or strong at the bench, but if you're strong at one, doesn't necessarily mean you're stronger at the other. When it comes to the gym, most people express their strength in the squat, the bench, and the deadlift. The other exception is also the overhead press, also known as the military press. But for this video, I'll be sticking with the squat, bench, and deadlift. Now, because these exercises are compound exercises, and the squat and deadlift being more full body exercises, most of the times, before even watching this video, your sets for these exercises would be in the 6 to 10 rep range, because any higher is more likely to be cardio, cause a lot of fatigue, and require a lot of balancing and not really hitting the muscle groups itself. So after selecting the squat, bench, and deadlift, now take half of those sets that you do in the 6 to 10 rep range and move them down to the 4 to 6 rep range. This will dramatically improve your 1 rep max next time you test it around, because you're dedicating more of your training to actually being familiar with the heavy weights. So you'll be able to contract harder and your technique would be solid even under those very heavy weights. And the added bonus is we're still training for aesthetics, because we're still prioritizing the muscle groups that we want to grow the most. And we're not changing the rest of the workout. We're just changing a couple of the sets when it comes to the squat, bench, deadlift, or whatever exercises you want to get stronger in. Now, some may say that when you go to such low rep ranges, such as 4 reps, you are sacrificing some gains, as explained when it came to the 1 and 3. This is actually correct, because when it comes to hypertrophy or muscle building, sets with reps of 5 to 30 provide the most gains. Any lower than 5 reps or higher than 30 reps will slowly start diminishing in gains. But that is still okay, because if you think about it, since the squat, bench, deadlift range is 4 to 6, only very few sets, or every alternating week or every third week, will you do a set of squat or bench or deadlift on the 4th rep. Most of the time you'll be doing either 5 or 6 reps, which are good gains, or you're doing the other half of your sets in the 6 to 10 range, which are also good gains, and you also have the remainder of your workout which has been unchanged. This way you'll be prioritizing aesthetics while still getting stronger on the lifts that you want to improve. May the gains be with you, and see you in the next one.